people are still joining us, which is fabulous, but I know we have a lot to cover, so I want to get started. First of all, welcome. Welcome to the Ohio River Discussion Series. We appreciate that you joined this discussion today. That's the purpose of this webinar series, is to bring as many people into this discussion as possible. The Ohio River Discussion Series is an opportunity for communities to share their knowledge and passion for the Ohio River. Now, this monthly series was created in 2020 by the Ohio River Recreation Trail. This year, in 2021, the series was expanded with additional partners to provide additional content and additional support. The partners include, of course, the Ohio River Recreational Trail, the Ohio River Basin Alliance, the Foundation for Ohio River Education, or SANCO, and the National Park Service. My name is Lisa Cochran, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for SANCO, and my role today is facilitator of this discussion. I will move through the agenda by introducing the speakers, serving as a timekeeper, and facilitating the question and answer session or open discussion at the end. So as you can see, let's move through my agenda. Housekeeping. First task, of course, is housekeeping. We ask that everybody mute your microphone unless you're speaking. Also, please disable your camera unless you are presenting. Throughout this discussion, please send all questions and comments to the chat. And we do this just out of necessity due to the number of people who are joining us. The audio would be very challenging. So we'll put all questions and comments through the chat feature, if you would, please. And please be aware that this discussion will be recorded and published later. Now, we're using the GoToMeeting format, which is similar to Zoom and others, but it's just different enough that the only feature that I will point out is your ability to change your view is typically located at the top of the screen. You have options of view everyone, who's talking, active cameras, and hide everyone. Now, at this point, if you're willing, I would ask that all the attendees, including the presenters, to please chat your name and organization to introduce yourself to all the attendees, if you're willing. And throughout this discussion, if you'd like to use the chat to share links to your organization or content from your organization with everybody attending the discussion, please do. Please use the chat feature. Thank you. All right, hopefully everybody sees the agenda on the screen now. As you can see, we have 4 general topics today. Our topic as a whole is titled Ohio River Future Forecast, a view from university students. So the summary of today is students from architecture, political science, and engineering will share multidisciplinary projects highlighting the Ohio River and will reflect on the future as envisioned by the document titled the Ohio River Basin Plan. So first on our agenda, if you see, item number 1 is an introduction to ORBCRE and ORBA. Now, if those acronyms don't mean anything to you, that's fine. We're going to introduce those. So first, I would like to ask Chuck Somerville, could you enable your camera and your microphone and provide an introduction to ORBCRE?
Hey, good morning, everybody, or early afternoon. Good early afternoon, everybody. I will just say a few quick comments about ORBCRE. ORBCRE stands for the Ohio River Basin Consortium for Research and Education. It's an organization that started back in 1985. In 1987, it was registered as a 501c3 nonprofit and established a foundation in 1992. So ORBCRE is able to receive funding for the benefit of projects that in research or education in the Ohio River Basin. The goal of ORBCRE is to promote interinstitutional research and education in water-related concerns, or other environmental issues in the Ohio River Basin. And I think it's important to say that although a lot of the focus of what we do in ORBCRE, or what people do in association with ORBCRE, is focused on the Ohio River, it really is a basin organization, and a lot of the interesting things happen not just in the main stem, but up in the watershed and in the tributaries. ORBCRE has always been a peer-to-peer organization. It's not an organization that put together by deans or presidents of universities. It's really faculty and students working with each other, and it's been like in the goal, as the goal says, it's really been organized to promote inter-institutional research and education projects. It's had an annual scientific symposium since 1985, and this year we will have the 36th annual symposium. It'll be co-hosted by Thomas More University and Northern Kentucky University, and it will be in the greater Cincinnati area. Thanks.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Now I would ask Heather Mayfield, could you provide a brief summary, perhaps of ORBA, or just maybe your work group within ORBA?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, and welcome everyone. We're really excited that you all could attend today and excited to see these presentations. ORBA stands for the Ohio River Basin Alliance, and ORBA is a collaborative, unified voice of stakeholders within the Ohio River who are working to prioritize water resources within the Ohio River Basin and striving together to sustain healthy ecosystems and healthy river communities by implementing a strategic plan that includes 6 goals. The goals include abundant clean water, healthy and productive ecosystems, reliable flood risk management, the nation's most valuable river transportation and commerce corridor, world-class nature-based recreation opportunities, and knowledge and education to inform decisions. So you see the organizations that are listed, their logos are listed on our agenda page. All of these organizations are members of ORBA, along with countless other organizations as well. From what I understand at this point, I think ORBA has over 400 members. Membership is free. After this presentation, you will all receive a follow-up email that will give you a chance to learn more about ORBA. You can also do that through the link that Lisa shared, and also if you're interested to get involved. Now, one of the ways to get involved with ORBA is to participate in a work group. So those goal areas that I just mentioned all have work groups that are associated with them. And the work group that I chair is called the Knowledge and Education to Inform Decisions, or the KID work group. And really, in a nutshell, the purpose of our work group is to synergize the great work of multiple entities within the basin, including education institutions, K through university schools, research institutions, agencies, citizen science groups, and we want to synergize their work to prioritize challenges in the basin that can be addressed through research and education, and then to establish coalitions that can prioritize and map out a plan for specifically addressing those needs. Another outcome of our work group that we hope to achieve is to create a communication and marketing plan that will unify the public on the value of natural resources within the Ohio River Basin and to increase pride within the basin. So that's my role within our knowledge group. And then my day job, so to speak, is I'm director of the Foundation for Ohio River Education. We are an ORBA partner, and we are also the nonprofit education arm of the Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission, or SANCO. So I know that's a lot of acronyms, but don't worry about the acronyms. Just remember, we're all working together toward a common goal, and that's the Ohio River. Thank you, Lisa.
Heather, that was beautifully said. Don't worry about the acronyms. We're just working together for the Ohio River. Well said. Excellent. Well, thank you, Chuck and Heather. Those two very brief introductions provide a good foundation for us to understand the student presentations that we're about to see and how they complement that document that I mentioned and that world, that complex world that Heather referenced of we're all working together for the Ohio River in this multidisciplinary way. So our first presentation is from a University of Cincinnati student. Our student is Steve Almond. And Steve, we will now make you presenter. And while Adam does that behind the scenes for us, I'm going to read a very brief bio of Steve. Steve Almond is a Dean's List fourth-year architecture student and member of the National Society of Leadership and Success. Upon graduation this spring, he will pursue a Master of Education degree also from UC DAP. Growing up in Cincinnati, Steve sees the river as a place of recreation and gathering. And I see your screen now. So Steve, please present. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So my group and I are focusing on aging infrastructure along the Ohio River. In particularly, I will be talking about my specific site at Abandoned Lock 19 in Washington, West Virginia. It's just west of Parkersburg, West Virginia, and south of Marietta, Ohio, just for some reference. But our goal is to create a community outdoor learning and recreation center. So the overarching theme for our group is understanding the current value of the Ohio River and then creating a new value for it. Currently, it exists as a place of industry and commerce and really maintains majority commercial traffic. And what we would like to see the river become is a place of education, recreation, and gathering. So the physical problem that my group and I are addressing stems from 1954 with the Rivers and Harbors Act, which essentially condensed the 53 federal locks and dams on the Ohio River down to 20. And the result of that is all of these sites that were so heavily industrialized and built up in a very short amount of time became abandoned and empty sites. So Abandoned Lock 19 is specifically where I am focusing my project on. And as you see, it's a place that has been left vacant for about 70 years now and has never been formally repurposed for any use. Now, it's a unique space because not only has it not been demolished as the majority of these spaces were, but it really has never found a new use in this community that used it for such a long time. And so our attempt at this, finding a solution for this problem, is understanding the historical context of this space, understanding how it exists now and what its past life was, and then finding programs to reinvigorate the space and reinterpret it and engage the community and the river in these areas in different locations throughout the river. So this proposal is a prototype for how we would do this in multiple locations, and it addresses either specific concerns, interests, or desires that these communities like Parkersburg would have. On the left here, you'll see the overall master plan for this site that I've developed. And really, there are a few particular spaces in this site that I feel highlight how it's going to be used and how it re-engages the public with these areas. The first being a performance space that you enable the public and schools and overnight camping assemblies to have a space to lecture and meet. And this is a space that anyone can use. It would be public. It's something that the community has showed interest in having. And I think it would be great to pair the recreational aspects of a park and of camping programs with the education that can be provided on site with it. Additionally, we have to keep in mind this is a natural site. It's very beautiful. And how are you going to address that? How are you going to enable people to experience the natural beauty of that site? And providing things like observation towers and gallery spaces that are open air and exist to juxtapose any man-made art with the natural experience that you will have at that site, while simultaneously connecting the old historical aspect of the park to the new developments that we would place on it. And what I would say was the most prominent concern amongst people in Parkersburg that I spoke to was having access to the water again. these are communities that have been cut off from the water for 90 years because of the construction of flood walls, and they really are just striving to have a connection with this river again, and ensuring that you provide a place for that, you provide access to the water, and provide a space for direct interaction and reintegration into that space is hugely important for this design. And so what I'd like to leave you with to conclude all this is that we have an opportunity to make the river something more than just a boundary or something as an object that we have to circumnavigate. We have an opportunity to make it something that is in itself a destination. And on the larger scale of our cumulative projects as a group, we have to ask, what are some productive uses for these sites? And how can we make them become opportunities to engage the river and engage these communities? And I believe it would be a majorly important solution to find answers for those questions. And with that, thank you for the time, and I will pass it on to the next presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. That was a very impressive presentation. And what I walked away with, to me, what was the most profound was the statement about people wanting access to the river. In some respects, the river is something that's just in our background in this, it's in our backyard in this community. And sometimes we take it for granted, but people do want access to the Ohio River. So that's what caught my attention. I like that. Thank you very much. And I know people will have questions for Steve, but we're going to go through all the presenters. So please hang on to your questions for the end or chat them now, whichever you prefer. The next speaker is Lindsay Rechterman. And Adam, if you could allow Lindsay to share her screen. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read a very brief bio of Lindsay. Lindsay is a Dean's List fourth-year architecture student and current vice president of Cincinnati's chapter of the American Institute of Architecture Students. She is evaluating options for enrollment in a 2-year Master of Architecture degree this fall. Her hometown of Minster, Ohio is roughly the midpoint of the Miami-Erie Canal, which connects the Ohio River to the Lake Erie. I like that. Excellent. Lindsay.
Thank you. So, what is the value of the Ohio River? This has been the recurring question within my studio this semester. Quite literally, the Ohio River Basin is home to 25 million people and is a source of drinking water for more than 5 million. It is heavily used for transportation and recreation. But how can we stretch this value? Can we incorporate community, education, health in its worth? Can we design destinations along the river that enrich this overlooked waterway and attract not only locals, but countless tourists? This topic of sustainable tourism along the Ohio River, a 981-mile stretch from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Paducah, Kentucky, is my objective this semester. A group currently addressing this topic is the Ohio River Islands National Wildlife Foundation, which was established in 1990 to protect wildlife native to the river. Their aim to increase interaction and tourism along the river led to the creation of the Kayak Challenge, a recreational trail covering 362 miles in 22 refuge islands along the Ohio. The challenge is to visit 20 of the refuge islands and take a selfie with the posted island sign near each landing point. Given the extent of the river and the distance between these islands, the challenge would take multiple trips to complete. And fun fact, no one has conquered this challenge yet. So the brief for my team was to propose a series of architectural interventions to support this existing kayak challenge route and encourage interaction with the Ohio River. My group members and I were to choose our own site along the route based on our individual programmatic needs. Our site is cut out on the enlarged portion of the map in the center there. And the site I chose is the red dot, which you see as labeled Floating Plaza. This site rests in a tributary between Middle Island and St. Mary's, West Virginia. So on my map here on the right, you'll see that my site rests within an existing marina and campsite and is just downriver from Middle Island's landing point. And here are some quick pictures of and around. So a commonly known issue that the Ohio River faces is pollution levels. In 2015, the river was actually recorded as one of the most polluted in the country. Mussels, a popular species in the river, help diminish this issue by purifying the water and easing nutrient overload. Unfortunately, the implementation of locks and dams has drastically affected the mussel population in the Ohio. This is a key topic that I want to address in my project. So my chosen program is broken down into 3 categories, which are river access, ecology, and hostel. I'm proposing a floating plaza with kayak rental or return, hostel-style lodging for those kayakers, flexible space for events, a freshwater mussel hatchery, and an exhibit for learning the ecological benefits of mussels and the history of the Ohio River. My space will be a hub for ambitious kayak goers, St. Mary's residents, children's camps, and all other various tourists. For the kayakers, the idea is that they would rent a kayak from the boathouse, which is one of my team members' projects shown on one of the earlier maps, and they would travel 20 miles downriver to my site, where they would either spend the night in my hostel to continue their journey the next day or end their trip at my site and be shuttled back to the boathouse. All visitors would be encouraged to observe the mussel hatchery on the left side there and learn the importance of protecting the river. There will be plenty of lounge space indoor and around the plaza for admiring the water and refuge island across the way. My goal for this project is to extend much farther than just the kayak challenge and recreation. The idea is not only to have clients who are renting a kayak or hostel or attending the ecology hub for a field trip, but a place where residents walk on Saturday mornings or hang out just to dip their toes in the water. So returning to that reoccurring question, what is the value of the Ohio River? I hope to see design of unique experiences that enhance this value. Possibly an annual mussel festival for when the cages at a hatchery are lifted from the water, the opportunity to spend the night on the river, learning about the history of the Ohio while exploring abandoned lock and dam sites, as you saw in Steve's presentation. Maybe these experiences could transform the previous answer of home, transportation, and recreation as the value to community, education, health, tourism, and so much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I loved that. I personally love kayaking, but I'm certainly not, as you would describe, the ambitious type. So when you talk about a 20-mile segment, that seems too much for me personally, but I understand the value of the infrastructure that could make it, as we build it, could get it more and more accessible to people who enjoy it, but may not be as ambitious as 20 miles. So we build that infrastructure. So I personally found that very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like Steve, I'm sure people have questions for Lindsay. However, I would like to defer those questions for the end. And to sort of wrap up the University of Cincinnati perspective and presentations, I would like, if John Stoughton is available, if you could briefly explain your connection to these students and provide a summary.
Absolutely. Thanks. So everyone, hi, great to be with you all. My name is John Stoughton. I'm an instructor and architect here at University of Cincinnati. On behalf of Steve and Lindsay, I just wanted to thank Heather and David for the invite to share our ongoing work with you all. We're kind of right in the middle of our semester, so this has been a nice kind of halfway point for us. In addition to Steve and Lindsay's project, we have 14 other projects going on all along the river. And I just wanted to just quickly shout out my other students. They've all been fantastic in this project. Yara, Alondia, Sarah Auger, Nathan Bly, Baker Brainerd, Jenny Dillon, Ann Karaskiewicz, Ashley Castle, Maggie McGlumphy, Grace Nemeke, Nathan Reinbold, Sam Rubin, Grace Rupp, Ethan Wall, and Haley Wynn. Some of them are with us today as well in this presentation. just to briefly kind of like reflect on our studio as it relates to the Orbital plan, because I think that's one like fantastic thing the discussion is doing is bringing some of these student projects and connecting them to the Orbital plan. I think, one of the values we found very inspiring about the plan was that it aims to create a comprehensive and connected system for the river. And so this idea about interconnectedness, both of the river system, but of governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. So how the whole river is kind of one interconnected system. So our studio is simply thinking about the river as one big park. And this might ask, how would you change your interaction with the river if it was one big park? Like how would you change, or maybe how would this change how the public treats the river if it was one big park system? I mentioned we have a number of other projects, speculative projects like these, and collectively, I think the only other thing I might add just to conclude is that we're thinking of all these projects as kind of like forecasts for possible futures along the river and its communities. So we know that forecasts can be wrong, especially this time of year or in the winter time. We're all Ohioans or nearby and understand that. Sometimes they're exaggerated. Sometimes I would say that like undoubtedly though, forecasts influence public behavior. They cause us to go out into the world and grab groceries or change our behavior. And so in this regard, I think forecasts are like political tools. And I hope that in some kind of small way, our forecasts are kind of possibly promoting this core value of being kind of a comprehensive and connected system for the river. So that's all I have. But happy to be here with everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, that frames it very well. How would your behavior change if the Ohio River were one big park? I like that. That certainly helps you think a little differently, and it certainly frames the work that your students are doing. So thank you. We appreciate the work, and we appreciate that University of Cincinnati shared that with us. I'd like to transition to two more student presentations from the University of Louisville. And our first presenter will be Forrest Clevenger. And I'm going to read a very brief bio of Forrest. And behind the scenes, hopefully we can make you presenter, Forrest. Forrest Clevenger is a second-year political science major, music minor, and honor student of U of L. He hails from the woods in southwest Louisville. They're part of what his mama named him for. His favorite time is spent walking in the woods, in these woods, with his dog. I like that bio. Thank you, Forrest.
Thank you for that generous introduction. Perhaps what I didn't like was that woods is part of a hollow that opens up to the Ohio eventually. So hearing the barges go by at night has always been part of my life.
I imagine that's beautiful.
It is. So first, I'd like to start off and share some photos with you all from a class I was part of this past semester with Dr. Wicks, Dr. Barnett. And then I'm going to turn it off and just share some thoughts with you all as well. So this class this semester was a kind of an experiment within our honors program, and it focused on the Ohio River. And we started by taking a look at the recreational trail. We talked with the National Park Service and all sorts of different partners, I'm sure some of you all, about the river and what's already being done there. That was one half of the class. The other half of the class was going canoeing, which was an incredible amount of fun and introduced tons of kids to the river. I think almost all of us in the class were being introduced to canoeing on the Ohio, really any river for the first time. A lot of us hailed from urban areas, and we just had fun. So these are some photos of us. We started out at the community boathouse down in Louisville for our introduction. If you notice in those photos, none of us are able to steer at that moment yet. We're still figuring it out. And we went around to different parts of Louisville, ranging from West Point, Kentucky, boathouse, and a few other places as well. We went biking as well, tried out the Greenway in southern Indiana, and we went on to Clarksville, where we saw folks working on the new park there, Origin. Just an absolutely incredible project. Because of the flooding there, see in this picture, they're trying to make a really different kind of park. One that can survive and is designed to be completely flooded regularly. It's future-proofing for climate change. So coming away from that experience, each the students in the group were in the class were part of different groups focusing on these river town cities, going in and visiting them independently, and analyzing them and drawing up proposals and analysis that's going on there. And these are just a few of the slides that we went through and talked about for time in Clarksville. And part of that was documenting them. These are all photos that took ourselves and then incorporated. Walking away from that, we did another thing as a class. We worked on creating this exhibit at the Louisville Free Public Library. It's not open yet. I believe it's opening up on the 26th, got delayed because of COVID. And the photos that we took, we understood is a part of the historical context of the advocacy that's been going on in the river. Specifically, we took a lot of looks at the work that was done by Reuben Gold and Jesse Thwaites, a couple that sailed down the Monongahela and the Ohio for 5 years on the shantytown boat, documenting the river with a number 2 Kodak camera in these circular photographs. Here's the camera down there as well. And these are some of the earlier photos of the river that we have to go back and look at. And stepping away from that as well, we're also working on a club now. The work of the class was so much fun that some of us decided to get together and keep doing it. So just a promotional post that we made. With that, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment. So I think talking with you all about why the river is important isn't what I need to do. You all are all connected to the river and care about it in your own different ways. One topic that I think might not get as much attention as it could, though, is the intersection of youth in the river. You all have cool ideas for what we should be doing for the river, but what we need is human capital and in addition to financial capital to make those cool ideas happen. And from a long-term standpoint, engaging youth while they're in school is formative. It creates whole generations of people that are invested in whatever they're being taught. So for that class of students that had that class with Dr. Wicks and Dr. Barnett, all of us are going to step away caring about the river. Some of us are going to come back and probably never leave the river. Others won't come back to the river, but they'll still have that knowledge and that care with them. Level of awareness that other folks just will not have if they don't have it. So getting involved in schools, I believe, is maybe the most important thing we can do from a long-term standpoint. It's one of those things that reminds me of my favorite Wendell Berry quote, plant sequoias. It's something that we have to do now, but the results of it won't be around for decades. I think that's about it for me. It's really important for the health of youth as well. Anyways, thank you all so much for sharing some of your time with me, and really appreciate it.
Excellent. I like the phrase to engage the youth, and that complements what you said earlier in your presentation when you were showing us the photos of you and your classmates canoeing. As university students, you said that some of you had never been on the Ohio River. Some of you had never canoed, even as university students. So you're able to see the value of engaging youth at that time. Yes, excellent. Very nice presentation. We appreciate that. As I've said with all of our presenters, I'm sure people have questions for you, but we're going to wait until the end. Our next student presentation is from a student, Sam Kessler. However, unfortunately, Sam is just not feeling well. And so we've asked Russ Barnett to make the presentation for SAM. Sam, I think it's important to note, was the winner of the 2021 ORB-CRE Ohio River, or excuse me, perhaps was it 2020 ORB-CRE Ohio River Basin Summit poster session. So we're disappointed that Sam is not feeling well and unable to present, but we appreciate Russ providing the content. Russ Barnett, it seems that you are able to share your screen. So if you could provide Sam's presentation and then perhaps also describe your connection to the two students.
Okay, just a brief introduction of who Sam Kessler is. He is an undergraduate student in geography. He's also the lobbyist for the Kentucky Distillers Association. And I've worked with him for a couple of years now, and I'm going to be describing some of the research that he and I have been involved in on developing a new method to monitor fecal coliform. So where the area that we're looking at is on fecal coliform, and as has been talked about, Lindsay brought this up of talking about the Ohio River is highly polluted, and that is the major obstacle for us to move forward on any kind of recreational activity on the river. The fact is that John mentioned that he was hoping that the Ohio River would be one big park. The Ohio River already is one big park. It's just that most people have not recognized that. And so one of the biggest obstacles we're going to have is that we have to have a way of convincing people that it is not as polluted as most people want to believe. The area that we've studied for this new methodology is in southwest Jefferson County, which is Louisville. On Mill Creek, it drains the southeast portion of the county and into the Ohio River. So it's an urban stream. And so what we were doing there is, right now, if we look at how the requirements to sample for E. coli, the protocol is to take 5 samples during the summer months and take the geometric mean of those 5 samples. And that means that it's a very costly proposition to try to identify E. coli levels, because you're taking 5 samples with 5 lab results. That's anywhere from $100 to $150. And you're sampling, have to go out there 5 times, so the labor cost and travel cost would probably be twice that amount. And so you as a citizen or government or anybody wanting to do these kind of sampling, it's a pretty costly and time-consuming process. So the idea was, can we do some kind of cumulative samples? We already knew that it's, when we're taking 5 samples randomly, that it's really not a very scientific method of doing it, but we haven't come up with a better way, and we think this research is focusing on a new way of doing that kind of sampling. So we also looked at 2 other streams, a control stream of Wilson Creek and Bernheim Forest. It's all land that's been in conservation for almost 90 years, and so it has been considered a reference reach stream for many years here in Kentucky. It has low E. coli levels. And we also looked at Beargrass Creek, which is another urban stream, and Louisville, which has very high levels of E. coli. But our methodology that we came up with could be applicable to any tributary to the Ohio, and we think it is applicable to sampling within the Ohio Basin, or Ohio River itself, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So what is cumulative sampling? We're sampling for both point and non-point sources. We're looking at not only transport by tributaries coming into the river, but we're also looking at bed load contributions. And what we're doing is then taking a integrated swab over a time period from hours to really an entire month, that we could take one sample for an entire month. And we think it's just as accurate as taking 5 samples over a 30-day period. So these are really profiles for that would be done during the recreational period, which is typically from May to 1st of October. And these are just the method that is required now. The protocol that's required now is promulgated in a Kentucky regulation that's identical to the EPA's protocols. So as a result of this research, Mr. Kessler has applied for a patent, and it's pending for this process. And so I'll describe it in a little more detail. There's some research that has used this same approach of sediment bags for sampling. Typically, they've used sand as the within the bag, and used them for longer periods of time, and had, because we know that fecal coliform will adhere itself to sediment in the stream. But we've had there's a lot of problems with doing that. And so one of the things that we've kind of developed is, and the biggest problem has been when you put it in a bag, if you have a current in the stream, the pores in the bag widen and you lose a lot of your sediment. And so we've looked at using diatomaceous earth and found that to be more compatible. On the bottom right is a close-up of what that looks like. And as you can see, it's very porous. And so there's a lot more surface area for the fecal coliform to adhere to the sediment in these bags. We also realized that what we were interested in is having contact, but we developed, you can see in the upper right, tubes, and that ended the problem with those bags being distorted by this in current. So we used bags that, quite frankly, we were able to find on Amazon, and we built our own tube design. And that's how we have proceeded. We sampled usually in the Thaueg of the stream. This is compatible with almost every protocol for water sampling in a stream. And then what we did was then analyze the membrane filtration, and we were looking at trying to figure out what the best dilution factor might be. And so some of the results, and I won't try to go through all this, suffice it to say, when we looked at the same time that we were using these sediment bags, we were also sampling according to the state and federal protocols. So we're sampling 5 times in the 30-day period. And as we compared the results in the final analysis of the existing protocol with our protocol, we found that we came to the same conclusion. So there's a direct correlation. We came to exactly the same conclusions. We were using Spearman Rove as the statistical analysis of that. But essentially, that's what we were able to show. And so we think that this process will allow us to do sampling for E. coli in a much more economical method. And more importantly, we think it's actually more accurate that we actually look at a cumulative. It's not a one-time grab sample, which has its problems of being representative of the stream, but we were able to do these over weeks at a time. We were using 2 weeks and 4 weeks as our in our study. And we were using as part of this sampling, we were studying whether we could use a bag method that was developed at North Carolina State to sample, and we found that this also was we demonstrated that it was an effective way of doing the sampling. This would bring down the cost of even sampling one time to less than $10.
Russ, forgive the interruption. I'm starting to see some questions roll in, and I would like to save a few minutes before 1 o'clock for questions from the attendees. Would you be able to wrap up and explain your connection to the? Very good.
Very good. So for the Ohio River, this methodology could be used in the tributaries. We could use it in recreational areas by just dragging one of these bags behind the canoe and get a sampling within a broad reach of the river. All of those things are pretty possible. Very similar, we already have a program, or USGS has a program where similar cumulative sampling is being done, being towed by the barges up and down the river. And so I just wanted to, here's some of the people that have helped us on this particular research that we've been doing. So I'll stop there, and I'm not sure how to get rid of that.
There you go. And Russ, thank you very much for reviewing Sam's information. I know that's critically important, managing the cost and the efficiency of the sampling. Would you be willing to just very briefly explain your connection? And I believe you touched on it in the beginning about Sam, but how are you connected to Forrest as well?
Well, both of these students I've had in my class, and with so Forrest was the class that he was talking about. Dr. Wicks and I taught that class last fall, and we'll be teaching a similar class this fall. For Sam, he originally came to me. He was interested in studying, actually interested in studying the biogas generation, and he and I are still working on a project on that. But we were interested in this as a way of reducing cost. So I've worked with him for the last 2 years on this particular research. So let me kind of wrap these two presentations from the University of Louisville up. If we hope to do something with doing more, having more people involved in doing participating in recreation and pursuits on the river, we have to have some kind of change in perception of the river. So right now, the perception that most people have is that it's contaminated. As Forrest mentioned, most of the students that we've taken out on the river, even if they live there their entire life in Louisville, they'd never actually been in the river, so it was not really seen as something that had any potential recreational value. And that's the reason that Dr. Wicks insists that we take them out and on canoes in the river, and also teach them that it's safe to do so. So as we think about that vision, we have to have a collective vision. So you heard from Lindsay and Steve earlier, kind of looking at it from an architectural standpoint. Do we have a place that you can go and see the river or access the river? But it's our belief that the best way to understand the river is to get into the river and be on the river. And so part of that for us collectively, if we're going to try to change that vision, we have to start with getting NGOs together, marina operators, fishermen, bikers, hikers, hunters, bicyclists, environmentalists, barge companies, all kind of thinking. All of them might have a perception of the river, but they don't really understand a holistic look at the river, and that's what we've got to start working on. We have to have the universities doing more. So you've heard from 2 universities, and you've heard from Okra that we already have a collaboration of universities. We have to strengthen that, and we have to, quite frankly, get governments involved. Local governments have been actually taking the lead in many cases on access to the river. State governments as well as the federal government all play a role in that. And the final thing we have to do is get the general public to have a perception that there is a value of the river. And those, I'm sitting here in Kentucky, and on a daily basis, I'm bombarded with messaging to visit Michigan, visit Pigeon Forge, visit Gatlinburg, come to Florida, come to Orlando. But in my as a longtime resident of Kentucky, I've never heard anybody or any kind of promotion to say, come to the Ohio River. And that's exactly what
Well said. Yes, well said. Come to the Ohio River for that collective vision that you mentioned. And I do hope that this webinar series is a part of that this is part of, not only the work of the university students, but this webinar series connecting anybody who's involved either through career, personal interest, geography, bringing those people together. So I'm hoping we can take the last 5 minutes for questions. And I know we will not be able to cover all of the questions, but I'm going to ask all the presenters at this time to make sure that your microphone and camera is enabled. And then what I will do is I will read some questions as I see them in the chat. And some of the questions will be for individuals and some maybe for groups as a whole. So I'm going to scan very briefly. And I see one of the first questions that I see is, my question for Steve is, have you looked at the other old lock houses?
Yeah, so there is a fair amount that are still existing as structures along the river at various locations in many states. But we have 4 people in our group, and we have all taken a different location. So some people have sites that have been entirely demolished. There's nothing there currently. But like me, another group member has taken a site that has existing structures on it. And so there is a pretty highly varied condition along these sites. And on my own, there are actually other buildings, but they were originally residences, and they're in a state that's really not salvageable at this point. So as far as including them as a redeemable site property, it's kind of out of the question. But yes, we've been looking at the vast array of different sites along the river that contain these kinds of structures.
Very good. I see another question for Forrest. Do you know if any efforts were made to determine how attitudes of student participants changed about the Ohio River as a result of their experience?
Yes, so I do not have access to that data, but I do remember taking surveys from Dr. Wicks and Dr. Barnett that I believe had questions addressing those points exactly. So I would defer to them on that one, but I believe that data does exist.
I think it has made a difference. We did not do a specific survey, but as a result of the class, then we now have a RSO that Forrest has been involved in getting that up and running to get more students out, so that students in the class are actually promoting canoeing and outdoor recreation to other students at the university.
Thank you. I see another question. I believe this would be directed to you, Russ, as well. Would it be possible to extract microbial DNA from the sandbags and use it to monitor how microbial community populations are changing over sampling time periods?
The answer is yes. We believe this sampling method could be used for a lot of different pollutants. We've focused on E. coli, but it definitely would be the same methodology. We believe could do exactly that.
Very nice. Well, I have 2 more minutes until 1 o'clock, and I'm going to ask one more question. But before I do that, I want all the participants to know that if you have a question for any of the presenters that we didn't get to, you will receive a follow-up email from ORBA with the contact information of the speakers. So if we don't get to your question and you'd like to follow up with any of the speakers, you will have that information. I do see another question for the UC students. There seems to be some representation from city and state officials on this webinar. Besides this presentation, have you connected with any other citizen or municipal organizations to share your proposals?
I can chime in on this briefly. At the moment, no. I would say that we're right in the middle of this design and research project, and our ambition is to kind of broadcast some of our findings out into the Ohio River Basin. So we're thinking about like a website or a social media kind of format to do that and to try to engage with more communities. Steve has been out to his site in person, but COVID has been extremely hard to kind of organize trips or travel. So we're trying to do as much as we can virtually. So we welcome any contacts you all have. We've had a great time talking with David and Heather as well throughout this semester about this.
Thank you. Anything from Lindsay?
So far, John has just gotten me in contact with a couple of scientists. So I noticed Chris Lawrence was on here earlier, or doctors, I should say. But I think he might have left by now. And then Dr. Lawrence has gotten me in contact with a couple other places. There's a research center down by the Columbus Zoo, and there's another one in Frankfort, Kentucky that I'm going to be contacting this week, a Dr. McGregor there. So just a few scientists on the mussel side of things helping me figure out the mussel cage design.
Very good. Well, I have 101, and I know we have a lot of things to do. So if any of the attendees need to leave, please do. As I mentioned, you'll receive contact information for the presenters. But I just want to ask this one last question. I thought this was very interesting. And the question is from David Wicks, and hopefully this isn't a typo. Is it a vision to have floating fat ramps. David, chime in, make sure that wasn't a typo.
Excuse me, I have to move. My wife is teaching. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with the floating islands. And is it a vision eventually to have floating islands that can be up and down the entire length of the Ohio River?
Floating islands as in
As in
like
your
built ones?
your proposal, yeah. I'm fascinated with that floating idea of a floating boat ramp. All through Korea, there's a whole series of them on the Han River that they use barges actually as their floating dormitories and floating boathouses. And I'm just fascinated with your floating boathouse.
Yeah, and forgive me, I tripped you up, Lindsay. I didn't guess that the typo was boat ramps. Forgive me.
Yeah.
That's okay. I
My
forgive you.
fault.
Yeah, I think it would be awesome. One of my first ideas was actually to do like a series of floating boat houses, which would be where like the kayakers could stay. But just like floating plazas in general, floating boat ramps, I think it would all be great and contribute to the already existing like refuge islands that are there. So just be not wildlife islands necessarily, but still tourist locations. I think would be awesome.
But, you know, check out Seoul, South Korea, floating boathouse.
Okay.
It's just on the Han River, a beautiful place. And then up in Chicago, they have floating islands that they're actually creating wetlands that float in the Chicago River as a purification deal. And they're finding it to be a tremendous draw for kayakers. They paddle on up to look at these floating islands. It's almost like a green roof, except for on a floating platform that absorbs water from underneath.
And that last one was in Chicago, you said?
And on the Chicago River,
Okay.
The Friends of the Chicago River sponsors it.
Okay.
No, I thought all the presentations were fascinating. You know, what I enjoyed today mostly is the interdisciplinary look. When so many people think about ecological research or river research, it's the science aspect of it. And to hear from, you know, architects and interdisciplinary people and educators, it's just I've enjoyed the presentation today tremendously.
Well said, David. Exactly. This is the discussion. This is the intent of this discussion. So, well, it is a few minutes after 1. And as I mentioned, if we missed your question or if you have a follow-up question later, you'll get that contact information. Heather, may I ask that you briefly tell us what we'll be discussing next month?
Yeah, so our next Ohio River Discussion Series webinar is going to take place on Tuesday, April 27th. Same time, it looks like. Everybody here should get some follow-up information or get some information about that April webinar in their follow-up email that they received from ORVA. We're still finalizing some details of the webinar itself, but the focus of it is going to be understanding microplastics in the Ohio River. So that's been kind of a hot topic lately and something we're going to explore a little bit more in depth with some researchers from US EPA and Penn State.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I thank all of our presenters and I thank all of our attendees. This is really the purpose of the webinar series. David, you said it very well, to bring together this discussion for the multidisciplinary approach. So I thank everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you for joining, everyone. Take care.
I look forward to hearing the rest of your project down the road.